Hello again, I'm Robert Fithin, and today I want to talk to you all about Deadwax and the letters and the numbers that you can find in there and what they all mean and how you can properly categorize your records on Discogs if you want to do that. So let's get right into that. There's all kinds of information I want to share with you today, so we'll start off with Capitol Records. These U.S. Beatles albums, a lot of those are on Capitol Records or Apple. Distributed by Capitol. Now, Capitol has 4 different main identifiers in the Deadwax, so you can know which record plant produced which record. Now, they have 4 main ones. They have the Los Angeles plant, which is kind of like a star. It almost looks like the Walmart star with just a bunch of lines coming out from an inner circle. That's the Los Angeles logo. They also have the Winchester logo, which is like a sideways triangle with a line coming out of it. They have the Jacksonville plant, which is a circle in the really early days, and then it became 2 parentheses next to each other, kind of looking almost like a circle. And then they have the Scranton, Pennsylvania plant, which is a triangle with the letter I above the letters AM. That was some sort of logo or something for machinists in Scranton, but that is the Scranton logo on Capitol Records. So now you can look at your Beatles albums in the US ones, or your Glenn Campbell albums, or your Grand Funk Railroad albums, or God forbid your Beach Boys albums, and know which plant produced those. Because that's kind of fun to do, right? You just look up, it kind of tells a little story about the birth of the record, where it's from, when it was from, who mastered it a lot of times, and we'll get into all of that good stuff. Now, Warner Brothers Records, as huge as they were, they did not have their own pressing plant. I still kind of find that hard to believe, but they didn't. So it was usually Capitol that pressed a lot of their records. CBS did it as well. So on Warner Brothers records, a lot of them you will find the Capitol identifiers on there. You know, the Los Angeles and the parentheses for Jacksonville, all those. Or you'll find maybe some CBS identifiers on there, and we'll get to those in a minute. But yeah, Warner Brothers did not have their own pressing plant, so they would use other record labels plants, and that would happen sometimes not only with record labels that didn't have their own plant, but sometimes if a record was so popular that the plant couldn't keep up demand for it, they would farm it out to other record label plants. And usually the rule of thumb is you want to try to get records that were produced by the own label's plant if they had one. So that's just a good rule of thumb there to go by. But yeah, Warner Brothers did not have their own pressing plant. However, Columbia certainly did, and Epic and all of the other subsidiaries of CBS Records at the time, now obviously Sony. They had the Santa Maria plant, which was like a squiggly S, sometimes with a line, with a 1 next to it or a 2, and then sometimes it would be backwards. They had the Carrollton, Georgia plant, which was a G, again, sometimes with a 1 next to it. And it was a big G, you know, that somebody had made. They also had the Terre Haute, Indiana plant. Now that one is particularly confusing on Discogs because Terre Haute has a line next to it. The T in the Runout has a line next to it. Now the big question is that line a slash? Is it an I for Indiana, or is it a 1? Everybody seems to have their own opinion about what that Terre Haute, what's next to that T. So it's in Discogs under different things. So if you want to try to find out where your Terre Haute Judas Priest, you know, look for that on Discogs, you've got to put a T1 and then go back and put a T slash and then go back and put a TI, because it could be under any of the 3. And I don't know which one is correct. But yeah, they're definitely under there, under all 3. So, or under one of the 3, I should say. So you definitely have to check that out. Terre Haute, very confusing what that thing is next to the T to some people, I guess. So yeah, check them all out. And I will get into how exactly to the best way that I do, that I've found to find your records on Discogs under the exact pressings. Now, obviously, Capitol and CBS weren't the only labels to use identifiers. RCA did as well. They had 3 main ones. They had an R. You'll see a little R that's stamped in the Deadwax. That's for their Rockaway, New Jersey plant. You'll see the H, which is for the Hollywood plant, and an I for Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, I don't know why all these plants are in Indiana, but I did go to Indianapolis and Terre Haute, Indiana, and none of those plants are there anymore. So, unfortunately, but yeah, the Indiana, big place to produce records back in the day. But yeah, the R, the H, and the I you will find in the RCA runouts to let you know which plant that is. And there are all kinds of different opinions about which one you should look for. You know, some people think that the New Jersey one's the best, the Rockaway one. Some people say, no, Hollywood, because California is where it's at. So, you just have to kind of do your own listening and do your own comparisons and whatever works best for you. Also, when you're looking for this stuff in the dead wax, it's a good idea to, have a well-lit room or do it right under a light, or maybe have a magnifying glass like this very simple one that, this came from like Walmart. This works great. Magnifying glass with a light under it. Or if you want to get really good and use what the pros use, there's those, those stationary ones that have the arm that comes up and then the magnifying glass over it and the light around it, the ring light, all that. Those are great too. Sometimes it's better to use one of these handheld ones though, because you can move this around on the dead wax to read it and to kind of change angles and to get that light right on there. When you use a stationary one with an arm on it, you have to move the record around. And sometimes you can bump the record into it or, things like that. So it all depends, again, on your preference, which a lot of what I'm talking about in this video depends on your personal preference. Now, I talked about going to Indiana and checking out some of those, buildings. I guess they're not plants anymore. They're just buildings. I also went to Pinckneyville, Illinois, which is about an hour and a half away from here. That is where a lot of the Decca and MCA records were produced, like this one from The Who. So yeah, they had the Pinckneyville plant and the Gloversville plant. And the Pinckneyville plant is in the dead wax with what looks like two diamonds. And then between the two diamonds, there are lines and then a P. And then the Gloversville plant is two squares. And between the squares, two lines and a G, always stamped. So it's also easy to tell which is which by not even looking. You don't even have to get your magnifying glass out and your light out. You can just look at the label. The plant on side 2 next to the index number will sometimes have a diamond next to that right on the label. And those are my favorite kind of record labels, the ones that were nice enough to put what pressing plant it was right on the label so you can see it very, very clearly. Atlantic Records, great at that. Atlantic Records usually has the pressing plant right on the label. You don't need to get your magnifying glass that you can, well, unless you can't read that small print right on the label, but it's right there. And they have all kinds of codes for their plants. AR was the Allied Record Company. BW was Best Way. The CSM was the Columbia Santa Maria. LY was Shelley Products. PL Plastic Products. Usually it was RI for the Richmond one or PR for Presswell. Those are two really popular ones used on Atlantic. Specialty SP, that's another really popular one you'll see on Atlantic labels. MO, though, those are Monarch pressings from the Monarch plant. If you see MO on an Atlantic label or an Atco label, those are the ones you want. Those are probably going to sound the best 9 times out of 10. And the legend has it, one of the reasons those sound so great is because Led Zeppelin's manager, Peter Grant, had his offices really close, his U.S. office really close to the Monarch pressing plant. And if you know who Peter Grant was, he's a big guy, big intimidating guy. Looked like a mobster. If you've seen the movie, Led Zeppelin movie, The Song Remains the Same. He was apparently not somebody to mess with. And this legend has it that he would go into, just make these surprise visits and just decide to pop on in to the Monarch pressing plant and make sure that everything was calibrated to the T, make sure all the T's were crossed, the I's were dotted, know the P's from the Q's, all those cliches. He would make sure that pressing plant was doing the best job they could with his Led Zeppelin pressings and thereby all the other pressings. This mainly was, obviously Led Zeppelin was the early 70s and mid 70s, but Monarch on Atlantic, everybody's looking for those. So those are the ones you want to get. Unless you live in this area, then don't get Monarch ones. Save those for me. But you guys out on the West Coast, you got it lucky. Because there's apparently, from what I hear, Monarch pressings just everywhere. Here in the Midwest, when you see a Monarch pressing, it's like, wow, I got to get that. It's like it's been imported from the West Coast or something. So yeah, Atlantic Records right there on the label. Other labels that have the pressing plant usually right on the label. Casablanca, not all the time, about I'd say 2/3 or maybe half the time you can find those numbers on here, and they would let you know which pressing plant did the record as well, and you just have to know what number goes with what plant. 56 was the Pittman plant, 73 was again Terre Haute, and 25 was the Santa Maria. Those were all Columbia plants. Or the RCA Indianapolis also did some Casablanca pressing. 70 was the India plant from RCA. Like, again, Casablanca did not have their own pressing plant. You had Allied, which was 22. Monarch, again, look for the Monarch. That was 24. You had Plastic Products doing 30. Specialty was 49. You know, all these codes. I could make a video about all the codes on all the labels. That'd be like a 10-hour video. So just keep it kind of shorter. But yeah, you had numbers that went with the codes. It was for Casablanca. Also, Polydor. On about half their labels, you'll find a little number on there, and that corresponds with those plants as well. And you know who else? You know what other label did that as well? K-Tel. Yes, so if you want the best sounding K-Tel album, look for the 24 on K-Tel, and that'll be a Monarch pressing of a K-Tel album. So yeah, you had all that good stuff. Again, you don't need a magnifying glass to look in the Deadwax and a light. Sometimes you might need a magnifying glass, but you don't need the light and the Deadwax. Sometimes they put it right on the label for you to know which pressing plant did the record. Now, sometimes a label that did not have its own plant also apparently didn't have its own label maker. So the text on the labels would be completely different. So you can just look at the label and kind of match it up with what's in Discogs to find out which pressing plant made a lot of the Motown albums, or which Motown label goes with your record, so you get the right pressing, even if it doesn't say which plant did it. You know that this is the pressing that goes with yours, so you can categorize it or catalog it properly. Of course, Motown, and then you have the Motown subsidiaries like Gordy and Tamla. But yeah, like this is Rick James, bitch. And so yeah, let's you could look at all the different Motown kind of texts, and some of them will say side 1, and the 1 will be written out as the word, and sometimes it'll just be the numeral. It'll be on the left side, it'll be on the right side, it'll be just all over the place because they did not make their own labels apparently. So yeah, it's all different. And London was the same way. Parrot, London was that. So the early Rolling Stones all had different looking text fonts on their labels, depending on what plant made them. Now, the way I do this in Discogs, I think this is what works easiest for me, is I'll try to narrow it down. You know, I'll look up the Rolling Stones now, and then you know, this is a stereo pressing, so look up the stereo one. So you got only vinyl, obviously. You're not looking at CDs or 8-track tapes or something like that. Only in the US, so you're narrowing it down even more. And then just open everything that's left. Like there might be 12 things left. Open each one of them in a different tab. I mean, I'm sure most computers can handle having 12 or 15 tabs open at the same time. And then just look at the labels, and if it doesn't match, you exit out. Next one, that doesn't match. Exit out. Oh, next one, oh, that looks like that one. Leave it up. Next one doesn't match. Exit out. So then you're left with maybe 2 or 3, or hopefully just 1 tab, and you can kind of figure out by the matrix numbers or whatever's left which of those 3 or 2 are the correct one. So it's kind of like a narrowing down process when you've got these labels, but you don't really have a lot of other information. Like a lot of these things will just have the number of the you know, the album number up here and maybe a couple of other numbers, and that's it. So, and sometimes things in Deadwax are really difficult to read if they're not really stamped in there hard, or if they're kind of lightly printed in there. You could, I mean, I don't know how your eyes work, but mine, I could sit there with a light and a magnifying glass for 15 minutes and still not be able to make out quite what that says. So sometimes you do need to use like a kind of a narrowing down process, and you got to open like 12 tabs and just start exiting out of the ones that are obviously not correct. So yeah, that's a good way to kind of categorize your albums in Discogs, a narrowing down process. Or sometimes you get lucky, you can type in the number and boom, that's the only one that comes up. You know it's that one. There's other ways, depending on the album, to kind of know whether you have a first pressing or not. Usually if you look at the end of the number in the Deadwax and it's like got a 1A or something like that, that's a good indicator. It doesn't work all the time. Again, nothing I'm saying really is 100%. Usually it's just good rules of thumb. But sometimes certain albums have mistakes on them, or different things on a first pressing that they would fix later on. Like Red-Headed Stranger from Willie Nelson. Very first pressings of this have a writing credit that's incorrect. So on the next run, they corrected it. So if you have that writing credit that's not correct, you've got a first pressing. In this case, the title track, Red-Headed Stranger, was originally mistakenly credited to Stoltz and Kalish. And then in the next run, that was corrected to Stoltz and Lindemann. So yeah, they were both released the same year. So the very first pressings have that mistake on there. There's even more obvious mistakes too, like another Willie Nelson album, this one with Merle Haggard, Poncho and Lefty. Poncho is misspelled right there on the cover and on the label everywhere. On the back, it's spelled like a poncho that you wear, Poncho. It's supposed to be Pancho. So they changed that on everything after the first pressing. So if you've got poncho misspelled, you've got a first pressing of this. Oddly enough, the exact same mistake happened years earlier with this Luxury Liner album from Emmylou Harris. They spelled Poncho wrong with the song Poncho and Lefty and corrected it on later pressings. So if you got to have that first pressing of the Emmylou Harris album, that's how you know you've got that. Now, also to know you have earlier pressings, there's a super obvious way that I'm sure you already know about, and that's labels kind of changing their design. Here's an example of Warner Brothers. Early ones have this gold label, at least early ones from the rock and roll era, have the gold label there. There's a early one, a mono early pressing from the Grateful Dead's debut. They later on moved to a green label, either having the Warner Brothers logo at the top or the Warner 7 logo. Those are two different variants there, so you know whether you have that pressing of that. And then after the green label, they went on to what's known as the Burbank label, which is these, the palm trees there. So that's the Burbank label. Of course, a lot of it's in Burbank. They later moved on to the Warner Brother beige label with the little thin lines going across it horizontally. And then after that, in the 80s, they move on to the white Warner Brothers label that has the Warner Brothers logo all kind of shaded in the back all around it. So yeah, a lot of record labels do that. They go from, like Capitol went from the black thing with the rainbow around it, like a lot of the early Beatles albums. And then after that, they went to the green label with the new Capitol circular logo in 1969. That only lasted a couple of years. And they went to the red label with the same logo. A couple of years after that, they changed to the orange label with Capitol written at the bottom. And then after that, it was the purple Capitol label with the old Capitol logo back in there. And then confusingly enough, and I hate that they did this, in 1983, they went back to the black label with the rainbow rim. So it looked like records from the 60s, but they're really from the mid-80s. Very, very confusing for Capitol to pull that on us. But yeah, so Columbia has a great history of record label changes because they only have a couple. And a lot of people, you might have heard the phrase 6-eye Columbia. And that basically looks like this with the 6 eyes here. Of course, it's usually red with black 6 eyes here. And after that, they go to the Columbia with the 2 eyes with stereo or mono in black on the bottom. Then after that, they go to Columbia with the 2 eyes with stereo or mono written in white at the bottom. And then after that, they go to what they used for years and years and years and years after that, which is the Columbia in a ring around the rim. And that went on, like I said, for decades. They used that. But this is a white label promo, and that's another cool thing to try to kind of collect. A lot of people interested in these early white label promos. But I've noticed by looking on the internet, there's a little bit of confusion about promos. Now, this white label promo is most likely a first pressing because this would come out before the record was actually released to the public. This is a pretty rare one considering this is an album from 1959, Marty Robbins here, Gunfighter Ballads. Given to radio stations or sometimes retail stores to play in store before the album was even released. Now that's a true promotional record. It has a different label on it. It's most likely a first pressing. Where the confusion comes in is with these gold stamp ones, like this. It's just a gold stamp on here to let you know that's a promo. Also, they'll have ones with a little notch taken out, a little cut in the cover, or I'm sure you've seen these, the side cut off. A lot of the Kiss solo albums had the side cut off. Now, usually, these are called aftermarket promos. And what that means is the only thing that's making this a promotional item is the fact that it's been stamped. This is a regular retail issue. It's just got a promo stamp on it. So there's nothing special about the record itself. It's just your basic retail record, but they just put a promo stamp on it, or they cut the corner off, or they put a notch in it. Those are aftermarket promos, and those are not as sought after as like a literal white label promo that is, a first pressing and put out before the album was even released usually. So there's a little bit of confusion. These were usually given to radio stations, these promo stamp things, after the record had already been released, or they were given to retail stores after the record kind of flopped or after it quit selling, or they ordered way too many copies of it, and it didn't sell as well as they thought it would, so they got to put it in the bargain bin. The Kiss solo albums are an excellent example of that. They made way too many of them at the time, and that's why you see a lot of those Kiss 78 solo albums with the corner cut off. That means it was a promotional from the bargain bin. Now, I saw something funny online one time. Somebody had a promotional Dark Side of the Moon with I think it was the corner was cut off, or maybe it was just a notch in there. And sometimes the notch can be on the side too. But someone said, oh, well, that's from the bargain bin. No, no, no. I don't think Dark Side of the Moon ever made the $3.99 bargain bin. That was most likely from a radio station, not the $3.99 bargain bin with Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. I know you might find this shocking, but sometimes there is misinformation on the internet. So one of the reasons I wanted to make this video is to kind of set a few things straight or whatever, just based on my experience and my research that I've done for decades collecting records. Because I do think there is a little bit of fun in finding out, like I said, the story behind where your record was born. I'm not so much into like the audio file stuff. I've done videos on that, the $150 audio file. I mean, those are easy to find on Discogs. I'm not about getting the absolute best, whatever. But as far as, getting the best for your dollar and avoiding bad pressings, that's why I really like to find out about, who's got the better pressings and the better pressing plants. It's not so much to get the absolute stunning, you can hear every foot tap or whatever, but it's more to avoid really bad pressings. That's what you want to do, because then you're going to have to get the record again and then again and so forth, trying to get the best one. But I do like a good sounding pressing. There's a lot of people who are like, well, I don't care about the pressing of the record. I just like the rock and roll. Wow. That's great. That's like saying I love cars, but I don't care what kind of engine it has or what kind of make or model it is. I just love cars. But anyway, some people have favorite pressing plants that they look for or whatever. And then there's also people that will press and master the record as well. I'm sure you probably heard the legendary Robert Ludwig. He's one of the big names that everybody's looking for, the little RL. Sometimes it's super tiny in the Deadwax. You find that on there, you're probably going to have a really good sounding record. There's the legendary story of the RL Led Zeppelin II. And that is the one where he made a really hot pressing of Led Zeppelin II, really loud, very big sound. And the main Big Cheese at Atlantic took it home to his daughter. She played it on a little child record player, and the needle skipped around on it. And he said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Stop the presses. We got to repress this. My little daughter's little Fisher Price player or whatever it is can't handle this." So they stopped the presses and made a new master of it and redid it. So those early RL pressings of Led Zeppelin II are worth a lot of money because they sound great. Now, I've only heard one on the internet, and then I've heard a couple that are just trashed. In person, I've heard the record playing. So I've never heard a pristine version of that, but even the ones I've heard through digital on the internet or whatever sound really, really good. So I can see why those are sought after. But yeah, the RL, the Robert Ludwig, you've got KG. A lot of people like Kevin Gray's work. He's master. You got the AT/JP. AT, of course, Atlantic. George Piros is the guy there. AT/DK is Dennis King at Atlantic. Porky. We gotta love some Porky. A Porky prime cut. Sometimes it just says Porky. Sometimes it says Pecco. And that's all George Peckham. And he does a lot of stuff in the UK, but sometimes his stuff is so good they use the same plates and just ship them over here to the US. So if you find that on there, it's probably going to sound excellent as well. A heart next to Pogo is Keith Olsen. You might see Chet, kind of a signature Chet in some of the CBS runouts. That is Chet Burnett. He's pretty good as well. Kendon is Kent Duncan, and that's usually a stamp that just says Kendon. I originally thought that was a planter or a company or something, but no, it's the actual guy's name, Kent Duncan. And Wally on a lot of the Capitol records, even the 45s, he's pretty sought after too. That's Wally Traugut. And sometimes you'll see a bunch of lines going this way and that way. It looks kind of like K, but it's really just slashes going back and forth, and that is Randy King, and he's pretty sought after as well. Now there's a long list that I could go on and on about, matching up names with initials. Just that's all on the internet if you really want to go in deep on that and see who did what. But those are a few of the names that people are really seeking out and really have a legendary status. And I often wonder if some of these people, like, Wally Trowgett or Randy King or Chet Burnett or, even Keith Olsen, anybody like that, realized that when they were doing this stuff in the 70s, they would become rock stars of the 2010s and 2020s with people seeking out their stamp or their signature or whatever in Deadwax. I just think it's really cool that out there all these years, these guys are like legends of the record pressing lore, as it were. Something else you might see in the Deadwax is TML, a stamp for TML. That's from the mastering lab. That gives you a good indication too. We don't know who's doing what there, but it's just the lab itself. That's a pretty good indication. That's going to be a really good sounding record as well. You'll see either TML-M, which is a master, which that's going to be the tops. You'll see TML/S, which is slave, or secondary as it's getting called now. But yeah, you'll see that. That sounds good too, not as good as the M. And then the TML-X, which is the extra, which, they all sound great. So if you see TML in there, chances are it's going to sound really, really good. You'll see DMM, which is direct metal mastering. Now, this is more from records for the 80s. But yeah, you'll see that like this Temple of the Dog original issue from 91. This sounds great. It's direct mastering. So this is kind of a long record, but they made it still sound good, even though it's got those tight grooves with direct metal mastering. So look for that in the Deadwax too, and it's probably going to sound really good. And it's not only on big releases. You think direct metal mastering, they're going to do that with the big releases. They're going to do that with stuff that's really going to be sound quality is at top of the mind and all that. No, they're everywhere. I mean, this Corey Hart album is direct metal mastered. So what's the song on it? I don't even know what the hit on here is. I Am By Your Side, I think, was kind of a hit. A little bit of one. But yeah, Corey Hart's Fields of Fire, direct metal master. But yeah, you see DMM, it'll either be stamped or it'll be written out there. Another great indication that's going to be a great sounding record. Now, sometimes it's fun just to see little messages that these people will write in the Deadwax. Little just, happy birthday, Kevin, or something like that. Who the hell's that? Or they'll do something like the Eagles were always doing like little secret messages in their Deadwax. The Smiths had messages in theirs as well. And I talked about one time the Roseanne Cash 7-Year Ache album where it says Goodbye John. And it says that in the Deadwax of the first releases or the first pressings, because they were made like the night after John Lennon was shot and killed. But yeah, there's serious stuff like that that's really interesting. There's also, but mostly it's just fun silliness. The Clash has stuff in there. Led Zeppelin has secret messages. And speaking of Led Zeppelin, back to Atlantic Records, they will have codes beyond just the pressing plant on their labels, and you can really tell a little more information about the history of the record, the history of the recording, and all of that. And again, so great that it's with Atlantic because it's right there on the label. The first thing you're going to see is an ST on anything after 1968. It's going to be on all of them, and that, of course, means stereo. The next thing, -A for Atlantic. After that is going to be a dash, and then 2 numbers. In this case, it's going to be 71. Now, I've seen a little bit of confusion online about this. 71 is the year of the master tape. So this came out in 1971. That's when it was recorded and produced and everything. And so it's going to say 71. However, this is a 1977 pressing of Led Zeppelin's untitled 4th album, also known as Led Zeppelin 4. So it's not going to say 77. It's still going to say 71. So there's a little bit of misinformation out there saying that that's the year of the pressing. It's not. It's the year of the master tape. So that's the number after that, and then the number after that is the tape master number, and then after that is the dash, and then, like I mentioned before, the code for the record plant that it was produced at. Again, hopefully you've got an MO of this because those apparently sound better, but usually you're going to see RI or PR for Presswell, RI for Richmond, SP for specialty, and then there's, like I mentioned, all the other ones are kind of secondary to those main four for Atlantic. So that's kind of breaking the code on the entire number there, because they're not just random numbers. That's easy. Atlantic is so easy. I love the way Atlantic did things. It's so easy to figure things out for them. Other companies like RCA and CBS, they had codes too, but you have to kind of know what the number means. Like RCA, the first is the year. And so, like, I'm not saying this is correct. I'm just, as an example, G would be 1964. Now, I don't know if G means 1964, but just, it would be that. And you'd have to know what went with what year. And it was just all over the place. And then they had even ones that were more convoluted than that. And so, again, if I wanted to make a video on what all the codes for all the different labels mean, it would be an 8-hour video, but or longer. But just know that that information is on the internet. Some of it, though, may not be correct because, the internet. But yeah, Atlantic always made it super, super easy. Also, to be able to tell the difference in quality, sometimes, especially with CBS like Columbia and Epic, machine stamped, if the whole number is machine stamped on later pressings from the mid to late 70s and 80s, it's probably not going to sound as good as one that is handwritten. The handwritten ones were first. They were the ones that were most care was put into. The machine stamped ones were just boom, 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 rolled off the assembly line. There's the ones that usually came with the Super Saver sticker or the Nice Price sticker on there. And just as a general rule of thumb, again, not 100% of the time, but as a general rule of thumb, the handwritten number on the Deadwax is going to sound better than just the stamped, completely stamped number on there. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are things that are always stamped, like the TML is always stamped. Record plants that are great, like Sterling or Master Disc or things like that, those are always stamped. 99% of the time are stamps. They're not usually written out. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the matrix number. If it's all just a stamp, it's probably not going to sound as good as if it's written out like that. So that's just about everything. There's only one thing left to talk about, and that is the dreaded music club releases. And I'm talking Capitol Record Club in the early days. I'm talking Columbia House. I'm talking RCA Music Club, later BMG Music Club. There's all kinds of different opinions on this too. Some people say that those don't sound as good. Some people say, what? Those sound fine. From my experience, they don't sound as good. There's different levels of quality. I think Columbia House itself has some pretty good quality issues. You're not going to see Columbia House on CBS because they just issued their own stuff through Columbia House. So Columbia Records and Epic Records and Portrait and all the Jet and all those labels, you're never going to see Columbia House on them because they just use their own stuff. So those are fine. When it gets into quality issues is when Columbia House is pressing other labels like Mercury or Warner Brothers or whoever. That's when the difference of opinion comes into play. And sometimes it'll be the Terre Haute plant, sometimes it'll be the Carrollton plant, sometimes it'll say Columbia, New York in a stamp. Those are the ones that I've heard don't sound as well. The issue is, though, if you know what Columbia House is, it used to be the thing where you get 14 albums for a penny. Remember that? Later it was 10 for a penny or whatever, or 10 for free. And then you have to agree to buy so many more over 3 years for double the price of an album in the store. And if you didn't send back the card that you got every week, you got an album that you had to pay for, they just sent it to you. Well, when you get 14 albums for free, usually these weren't music fans that did this. These were just your ordinary, run-of-the-mill, good old people that took advantage of this. And they'd get 14 albums in the mail one day, and they'd listen to half of them one time and put them away, slice the shrink wrap and so a lot of these were kept in really good condition, still in the shrink, played once or twice and put away forever. So they're in great condition. You see these shrink wrap albums that don't have any hype sticker on them, don't have any original retail price tag on them. Look on the back, and sure enough, there's that CRC code for Columbia Record Club. A lot of times you can see that they don't have a UPC on them. The earlier ones don't have a UPC code. They just have the white box and it's blank. That's a good indicator. Real small print on there, manufactured by Columbia House under license. Always look for that stuff. I don't know how many times I've seen some, man, this is in excellent condition and great price too. And then you flip it, manufactured by Columbia House. I should have known. But some of them sound pretty good. Some of them don't sound terrible. Some of them sound great. It's just a hit or miss with Columbia House. They do have a tendency to kind of sound bright. I have noticed that. Now the RCA BMG ones, I don't know of too many that sound good from that company. And here's a little fun fact. You could never order RCA records through Columbia House. There is no Columbia House pressings of RCA records, and there is no RCA or BMG pressings of Columbia or Epic records or anything on the CBS label. You could look through. That's why Columbia House never has Elvis Presley in their thing, or Jefferson Airplane, or anybody on RCA. And if you look through the RCA book, never had Billy Joel or Judas Priest or anybody on Columbia, Simon and Garfunkel, whoever. They were never on in the RCA book. They were competitors, so they didn't do each other's stuff. But yeah, the RCA ones I don't think sound that great, and they usually have a big indicator on the back, complete with their address and everything, manufactured by RCA Record Club or product of BMG Record Club. Just my opinion. People's opinions differ, but I would stay away from those. In fact, the only RCA Club record worth having, I showed this before, is this misprint of Kiss Rock and Roll Over, where Paul Stanley looks like he's got blue tears in his eyes. And that's just a misprint of the blue bleeding over or something like that. That is the only RCA Music Club record that you ever really want to get. So, wow, that was a lot of information. You can watch the video again and slow it down and take notes if you need to. I know I kind of went through a lot of it, but I tried to do it in a way that was conversational and not too convoluted or confusing or whatever. Again, if I wanted to go in deep on all the codes and what all the codes and all the different labels mean and all the different label changes and all that stuff, we would have a 15-hour-long video here. A lot of it is on the internet. Find some sites that have correct information as far as what I've already said, and then they've got the more information there for you. Try to stay away from ones that, you know, when people are just kind of going off, or, you know, Reddit or something like that, where everybody's just throwing in their own opinion and you don't know who's who or whatever. I would stick to actual websites that have a good, big, huge chunk of information. Those people usually know what they're talking about. And if you know any other information that you want to share with anybody about record collecting and pressings and all of that, put that in the comments as well. Let me know if I helped you out. That's the main comment I'd like to see. Let me know if I helped you out in any way in categorizing your collection, or learning a little bit more about your older records. That's really why I made this video, is just basically to help you out and share the information that I've gathered over decades of records. Again, I'm not so much into the one-steps and the MoFis and stuff like that. I'm just more into kind of finding out the tale of the record that I have. You know, the story behind its birth and who did it and where it came from and when it was done and all that good stuff. I've always found that kind of thing interesting, and I don't know, maybe I'm one of the few people like that. Hopefully you are too, if you've watched the video all the way up to the end. Once again, I'm Robert Fitton. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I've been giving you information that you can actually use and have some fun with.